forget fairy tales. Tonight, we're slipping into silk sheets and scandal. Behind every crown lies a secret, and behind every queen, sometimes a lover not listed in the royal family tree. These are the velvet whispers of history, tales too juicy for textbooks and too sleepy for tabloids, from flirtations in candlelit corridors to love letters hidden in corsets. We'll tiptoe through centuries of royal romance, one yawn-worthy affair at a time. So, fluff your pillow, dim the lights, and prepare to be lulled into slumber by the slow-burning drama of queens who ruled by day and whispered sweet nothings by moonlight. History has never been so hush-hush or so hilariously sleepy. And hey, if you enjoy royal gossip with a side of yawns, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Are you in a 4-poster bed in Yorkshire, a hammock in Goa, or hiding under the covers, pretending you're not binge-reading bedtime history at 3 a.m.? I see you, Queen Elizabeth. I was many things, brilliant, bold, and famously unmarried. But if you think she spent her nights sipping mead alone and whispering sweet nothings to her crown, think again. Enter Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, a man with cheekbones sharp enough to slice court gossip and a reputation that made courtiers clutch their pearls. They met as children, grew up in the glittering chaos of Tudor politics, and somehow managed to keep their bond alive through executions, rebellions, and one very suspicious staircase accident. More on that later. Dudley was charming, ambitious, and just the right amount of dangerous. Elizabeth? She was the queen, and she liked her danger well dressed. He is like a fox in velvet, she might have said, while sipping wine and pretending not to stare. Their relationship was the slowest of slow burns. They exchanged letters, filled with longing and political maneuvering. Dudley built a palace at Kenilworth, just in case Elizabeth felt like dropping by for a royal sleepover. She didn't, but the gesture was noted, and so was the suspicious amount of rose petals. Now, about that staircase, Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, died under mysterious circumstances, found at the bottom of the stairs with a broken neck. The court gasped. Elizabeth blinked. Dudley said, "It wasn't me," and history shrugged. Despite the scandal, Elizabeth kept Dudley close. She called him Sweet Robin, which sounds romantic until you realize she also called her dogs sweet. Still, Dudley remained her favorite, even as she flirted with foreign princes and toyed with marriage proposals like a bored cat with a feather. "I will have but one mistress here, and no master," Elizabeth declared, probably while dramatically tossing a goblet. Their love was never confirmed, but it was never denied either. Dudley died in 1588, and Elizabeth kept his final letter in a box by her bedside until her own death. If that's not romantic, it's at least bedtime worthy. So, was Robert Dudley the Virgin Queen's secret lover? Maybe, maybe not. But he was definitely the man who made her heart beat faster, and her courtiers whisper louder. Queen Anne didn't like crowds. She preferred quiet rooms, soft lighting, and people who didn't to make her feel like she was about to be judged for her embroidery skills. Enter Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Marlborough, a woman who was anything but quiet. Sarah was bold, brilliant, and had opinions sharper than her quill. She and Anne were inseparable. They wrote letters filled with affection, shared secrets, and occasionally argued like sisters, fighting over the last spoonful of pudding. "You are my dear Mrs. Freeman," Anne wrote, while Sarah replied, and you are my Mrs. Morley. Yes, they gave each other nicknames. Yes, it was adorable. Yes, it got weird. Their relationship was intense, emotional, possibly romantic, but mostly it was exhausting. Sarah had a habit of telling Anne what to do, and Anne had a habit of pretending she liked it until she didn't. Enter Abigail Mesham, Sarah's cousin and Anne's new favorite. Abigail was quiet, gentle, and didn't yell about politics over breakfast. Anne adored her. Sarah did not. She is a mouse in silk, Sarah hissed, and she's stealing my queen. The court watched as the tension grew. Letters flew, eyebrows raised. Sarah accused Abigail of manipulating Anne. Abigail smiled politely and served tea. Anne, caught in the middle, sighed dramatically and asked for more embroidery thread. Eventually, Sarah was dismissed from court. Abigail took her place. Anne's letters to Sarah stopped. The bedchamber battles were over, but the emotional bruises lingered like perfume on a pillow. So, were these relationships romantic? Historians debate. But one thing's certain: Queen Anne's heart was a battlefield, and her bedchamber was the front line. Mary II was the kind of queen who didn't make waves. She made ripples. Born into the chaos of Stuart politics, she was married off to her cousin William of Orange at the tender age of 15. It was a political match, forged in the fires of Protestant strategy and royal chess. Love? That was optional. But here's the twist. Mary actually grew to love William. Deeply, devotedly, tragically. And he, well, he loved her too, in his own cold, Dutch, emotionally constipated way. I am fond of her, William might have said, while adjusting his wig and avoiding eye contact. Their marriage was a strange blend of affection and formality. Mary wrote letters filled with longing. William wrote letters filled with logistics. She wanted warmth. He wanted war plans. It was like a Jane Austen novel rewritten by a military strategist. But before William, there had been whispers. A young man at court, a fleeting crush, a few stolen glances across a tapestry. Historians barely mention him, and Mary never did. It was the kind of love that flickered and died before it could be named. A ghost of romance, buried beneath layers of royal obligation. When Mary and William were crowned joint monarchs, she deferred to him completely. She ruled only when he was away, and even then, she signed letters, "Your obedient wife." Her heart was heavy with loyalty and maybe a little regret. "I am married to duty," she might have whispered, while staring wistfully at a candle. Mary died young, at 32, of smallpox. William was devastated. He never remarried. He built a memorial for her, and for once, he let the emotion show. Quiet, stoic, heartbroken, Catherine of Braganza arrived in England with a dowry, a devotion to Catholicism, and a teacup. Yes, she helped popularize tea drinking in Britain. You're welcome. She married Charles II in 1662, and for about 5 minutes, it looked like a fairy tale. Then Barbara Palmer showed up. Barbara was Charles's longtime mistress, bold, beautiful, and about as subtle as a cannonball in a ballroom. She had children with the king, a title, Countess of Castlemaine, and a permanent seat at the royal drama table. Catherine, she had migraines. "I am the queen," Catherine whispered, while Barbara adjusted her cleavage and winked at the guards. Charles didn't stop at Barbara. There was Nell Gwynn, the witty actress who called Catherine the Queen Cat, and once joked that she was the Protestant mistress. There was Louise de Querouaille, the French import with a talent for diplomacy and diamonds. There were others, so many others. The palace needed a revolving door, and through it all, Catherine remained composed. She prayed, she hosted, she smiled politely, while her husband flirted with half of Europe. Her heart broke quietly, like a porcelain cup dropped on velvet. She is made of silk and sorrow, one courtier said, probably while dodging a flying wig. Despite the humiliation, Catherine never left Charles. She never publicly complained. She even tried to befriend some of his mistresses. It didn't go well. But she held her ground, kept her dignity, and outlived most of the gossip. When Charles died in 1685, his final words were reportedly, "Let not poor Nellie starve." Catherine blinked. Then she packed her teacups and returned to Portugal, where she lived out her days in peace, prayer, and probably a lot of side-eye. So did Catherine have a secret lover of her own? History says no. But maybe, just maybe, she whispered her sorrows to someone who listened. A priest, a poet, a friend. Or maybe she kept it all inside, like a queen who knew that sometimes silence is the boldest rebellion. Queen Victoria was not known for her wild nights. After the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, she slipped into mourning like it was a velvet cloak, and she wore it for decades. Black dresses, black veils, black moods. The court tiptoed around her like she was a haunted chandelier. But then came John Brown. He was a Scottish servant with a beard that could shelter sheep and a personality that could start a pub fight. He was blunt, loyal, and completely unimpressed by royal protocol. Victoria adored him. "He calls her woman," one horrified noble whispered, "and she lets him." Brown didn't care for titles. He cared for Victoria. He walked with her, talked with her, and guarded her like a Highland wolf. Rumors swirled. Was he her lover? Her confidant? Her emotional crutch? The answer was yes. And also, maybe. And also, none of your business, according to Victoria. He was given a room near hers. He was seen slipping notes into her hand. He was the only person who could tell her to take a walk and not be banished to the tower. The queen even had medals made for him. Medals for being emotionally available. "He is my rock," Victoria might have said, while Brown grunted and poured her tea. The court was scandalized. Her children were furious. The newspapers had a field day. But Victoria didn't care. She had lost Albert, and in John Brown, she found someone who didn't treat her like a fragile relic. He treated her like a woman, a grieving, stubborn, lonely woman. When Brown died, Victoria mourned him deeply. She commissioned statues, wrote tributes, and kept his memory close, just like she had with Albert. 2 men, 2 loves, 1 queen who refused to be boxed in by royal expectations. So, were they lovers? Maybe, maybe not. But their bond was undeniable. And in the quiet halls of Balmoral, where the wind howled like bagpipes and the fire crackled like secrets, their whispers still linger. Queen Victoria had already mourned one man into legend, Prince Albert, her beloved husband, whose death plunged her into decades of black veils and emotional fog. But just when the palace thought she'd settled into permanent gloom, along came Abdul Karim. He was young. He was Indian. He was supposed to serve desserts. Instead, he served companionship. Abdul Karim arrived in 1887 as part of Victoria's Golden Jubilee gift from India. He was meant to be a token, exotic, decorative, and silent. But Victoria had other plans. She promoted him. She talked to him. She gave him titles. She let him teach her Urdu. And suddenly, the Queen of England was writing letters that began with "My dear Munshi." "He is my closest friend," Victoria declared, while her courtiers fainted into their crumpets. Karim was given a room near hers. He dined with her. He traveled with her. He was photographed beside her like a royal shadow. The court was scandalized. Her children were furious. The newspapers whispered. But Victoria didn't care. She had found comfort in a man who didn't treat her like a relic. "He listens," she might have said, while Karim quietly translated poetry and passed her mangoes. Was it romantic? Probably not, but it was intimate, emotionally rich, and deeply unsettling to the empire that preferred its monarchs distant and its servants invisible. Karim's influence grew. He advised her on Indian affairs. He received honors. He wore silk. And the palace seethed. After Victoria's death in 1901, her son Edward VII wasted no time. Karim was evicted. His letters were burned. His memory was erased from official history, but not from Victoria's heart. She had written of him with affection, defended him with passion, and trusted him with secrets. In her journals, she called him the light of my later years. And in the quiet corners of Windsor, where the portraits hang and the whispers linger, his presence remains. So, was Abdul Karim a secret lover? No, but he was a secret comfort, a velvet whisper in the twilight of a queen's life. Caroline of Ansbach wasn't your average queen. She read books. She debated theology. She hosted salons where the wine flowed and the Latin quotes flew like confetti. If you were looking for a monarch who could discuss metaphysics while adjusting her tiara, Caroline was your girl. She married George II, a man who preferred military drills to poetry and had the emotional range of a boiled potato. Their marriage was functional, political, and occasionally affectionate, like two co-workers who sometimes held hands. "He is my husband," Caroline might have said, while mentally correcting his grammar. But Caroline's real passion was philosophy. She adored thinkers. She corresponded with scholars. And one man stood out: Samuel Clarke, a theologian and philosopher whose letters to Caroline were filled with respectful admiration and just enough intellectual flirtation to make the court nervous. "Your mind is a lantern in the fog," Clarke might have written, while Caroline blushed behind a Latin dictionary. Their relationship was never physical. It was cerebral, emotional, a slow-burning exchange of ideas and affection that danced just outside the boundaries of scandal. Clarke was careful. Caroline was clever. And together, they built a bond that was deeper than gossip and stronger than protocol. George II didn't mind. Probably because he didn't notice. He was too busy yelling at generals and mispronouncing French. Caroline died in 1737, and Clarke mourned her quietly. He never married. He never forgot. And in the dusty corners of British history, their letters remain, a testament to a queen who loved too quietly and a philosopher who listened too well. So, was Samuel Clarke a secret lover? Not in the traditional sense, but in the realm of velvet whispers, where affection hides in footnotes and longing lingers in ink. He was something more. Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz was not a woman of scandal. She was a woman of gardens, music, and 17 children. Yes, 17. That alone deserves a crown. But her real legacy was her unwavering devotion to George III. a king who began his reign with brilliance and ended it in heartbreaking confusion. They married in 1761, and surprisingly, they liked each other. George was earnest, Charlotte was kind, and together they built a royal life filled with books, concerts, and babies. Lots of babies. "He is my dearest friend," Charlotte might have said, while rocking child number 12 and correcting Latin homework. But then came the whispers. George began to change. He talked too much. He laughed at nothing. He wrote letters that made no sense. The court murmured. The doctors panicked. Charlotte prayed. George was diagnosed with what we now suspect was porphyria, a disease that caused hallucinations, paranoia, and episodes of manic behavior. He once shook hands with a tree, believing it was the King of Prussia. Charlotte watched, helpless. "He is not himself," she whispered, while hiding tears behind her embroidery. As George's mind unraveled, Charlotte became his guardian, his nurse, his protector. She moved him to Kew Palace, away from the public eye. She endured his outbursts, his confusion, his heartbreaking moments of clarity, and through it all, she stayed. There were no secret lovers, no scandalous affairs, just a queen who loved too deeply and suffered too quietly. Her letters reveal exhaustion, sorrow, and a fierce loyalty that defied reason. "I am bound to him," she wrote, "even when he does not know me." Charlotte died in 1818, having spent decades watching the man she loved disappear piece by piece. George followed 2 years later, blind, deaf, and lost in his own mind. So, was there a secret lover? No, but there was a secret pain, a velvet whisper of heartbreak that echoed through the halls of Windsor and into the pages of history. Queen Adelaide was the kind of woman who made people feel calm just by entering the room. She didn't shout. She didn't scheme. She didn't throw goblets at courtiers. She simply smiled, nodded, and made everyone feel like they were doing just fine, even when they weren't. She married William IV in 1818, a man who had spent most of his life as a naval officer and the rest as a walking scandal. Before Adelaide, William had at least 10 illegitimate children with his longtime mistress, Dorothea Jordan. He was loud, impulsive, and occasionally wore his naval uniform to breakfast. "He is a storm," Adelaide might have said, while gently folding napkins and praying for patience. Their marriage was surprisingly tender. William adored Adelaide's calm. Adelaide tolerated William's chaos. They were opposites, and somehow it worked. But before William, there had been whispers. A young man in Hanover, a court musician, a fleeting friendship that may have bloomed into something more. The details are scarce, the letters are missing, and the historians are divided. But the rumors persist of a love that never had a chance to grow, clipped by royal expectations and buried beneath duty. She once danced only for him, one chambermaid claimed, probably while polishing silver and sipping gossip. Adelaide never spoke of it. She was too dignified, too careful. But her eyes, they say, lingered on certain melodies. Her letters, they say, carried a softness that didn't quite match her public persona. And her heart, they say, held a memory that no crown could erase. When William died in 1837, Adelaide mourned quietly. She gave away her jewels. She retired from court, and she spent her final years in quiet reflection, surrounded by books, flowers, and the occasional sigh. So, did Queen Adelaide have a secret lover? Maybe. Maybe not. but she had a secret grace, a velvet whisper of affection that danced just beyond the reach of history. Alexandra of Denmark was the kind of queen who could silence a room just by entering it. Graceful, poised, and perpetually photogenic, she was adored by the public and admired by the court. Her fashion set trends. Her smile lit up rooms. And her marriage? Well, it was complicated. She married Edward VII in 1863, back when he was still Prince of Wales, and already collecting mistresses like they were rare stamps. Alexandra was young, beautiful, and blissfully unaware of just how many women her husband had already charmed, courted, and occasionally misplaced in the palace corridors. "He is sociable," Alexandra might have said, while adjusting her gloves and ignoring the lipstick on his collar. Edward's affairs were legendary. He had liaisons with actresses, aristocrats, and anyone who could hold a champagne flute and a secret. His most famous mistress was Alice Keppel, a woman so entrenched in royal scandal that her great-granddaughter, Camilla Parker Bowles, would later marry Edward's great-great-grandson. History, it seems, has a sense of humor. Alexandra knew. Of course she knew. The court whispered. The newspapers hinted. The servants rolled their eyes. But she never confronted Edward publicly. Instead, she retreated into grace. She focused on charity, her children, and her beloved dogs. She smiled for portraits and cried in private. She is a statue carved from sorrow, one lady-in-waiting said, probably while fluffing a cushion and dodging gossip. Despite the betrayals, Alexandra remained loyal. She nursed Edward through illnesses. She stood beside him at coronations. She even tolerated Alice Keppel's presence at his deathbed. And when Edward died in 1910, Alexandra wore mourning with the same elegance she wore everything else. So did Alexandra have a secret lover of her own? History says no. But perhaps she had secret letters, secret dreams, secret moments of longing for a life where love didn't come with a mistress clause. Her story is not one of scandal, but of survival. A velvet whisper of heartbreak wrapped in satin and silence. Elizabeth Bowes Lyon was the kind of queen who made people feel like everything would be all right, even when it absolutely wasn't. She smiled through war, waved through grief, and wore pearls like armor. As consort to King George VI, she was the backbone of the monarchy, the mother of Queen Elizabeth II, and the woman who made resilience look regal. Her marriage to George VI was tender and true. He was shy, stammering, and deeply devoted. She was warm, witty, and endlessly supportive. Together, they weathered abdications, air raids, and awkward family dinners with Winston Churchill. "He is my strength," Elizabeth might have said, while gently correcting his speech and passing the biscuits. But after George's death in 1952, Elizabeth became the Queen Mother, a title that sounded cozy, but came with a lifetime of loneliness. She mourned deeply. She wore black. She retreated into royal duties and garden parties. And somewhere in that quiet, a whisper began. A man, a courtier, a friend. He was always nearby, always respectful, always just outside the spotlight. He helped with her correspondence. He accompanied her on tours. He made her laugh when the palace felt too heavy. And though history never named him as a lover, the glances, the gestures, the gentle familiarity, they spoke volumes. "He brings me peace," she might have said, while sipping tea and pretending not to blush. Their relationship was never confirmed. It was never scandalous. It was never loud, but it was there, in the margins of royal biographies, in the footnotes of palace memoirs, in the velvet whispers of those who knew her best. Elizabeth never remarried. She never publicly acknowledged any companion beyond duty, but in her letters, there are hints. In her photographs, there are shadows, and in her legacy, there is a quiet affection that defies titles. So, did the Queen Mother have a secret lover? Perhaps not in the way tabloids crave, but she had a secret comfort, a velvet whisper of companionship that made the silence less lonely. Queen Elizabeth II was the embodiment of restraint. She reigned with dignity, waved with precision, and rarely let emotion slip past the royal curtain. Her marriage to Prince Philip was famously enduring, filled with love, laughter, and the occasional eyebrow-raising comment from the Duke. But after his passing in 2021, a different kind of whisper began to echo through the palace halls. Enter her equerry. An equerry is a royal aide, usually military, tasked with assisting the monarch in public duties. But this one was different. He was always nearby, always attentive, always just a step behind, but never out of reach. He carried her notes. He opened her doors. He stood beside her like a shadow stitched from loyalty. He is her comfort, one palace insider murmured, probably while polishing silver and dodging corgis. Their relationship was never romantic, at least not officially, but it was intimate, emotional, a quiet companionship that softened the edges of a very public life. He made her laugh. He listened. He knew when to speak and when to simply be present. And in the twilight of her reign, that presence became everything. The tabloids speculated. The public wondered. The palace said nothing. And Elizabeth? She smiled, waved, and carried on, her equerry always at her side. He is a gentleman, she might have said, while sipping tea and pretending not to notice the headlines. When she passed in 2022, he was there, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, not in the history books, but in the velvet whispers of those who knew her best. So, was he a secret lover? No, but he was a secret solace, a quiet anchor in the storm of monarchy and in the hush of royal corridors, where footsteps echo like memories. His loyalty still lingers. Henrietta Maria of France was a queen with flair. She arrived in England in 1625, bringing with her Catholicism, French fashion, and a dramatic sense of style that made Puritans clutch their prayer books. She was vivacious, theatrical, and just a little too continental for the stiff collars of the English court. Her marriage to Charles III was passionate and politically fraught. He adored her, despite their religious differences and her tendency to redecorate entire palaces in velvet. She, in turn, loved him, but also loved art, music, and the occasional dramatic exit from a room. She is a tempest in silk, one courtier sighed, while adjusting his ruff and dodging her latest tapestry. Enter Sir Anthony van Dyck. He was the court painter, a Flemish master with a flair for elegance and a gaze that lingered just a second too long. Henrietta Maria became his muse. He painted her in pearls, in lace, in poses that suggested not just royalty, but intimacy. "He sees me," she might have whispered, while holding a pose and hiding a blush. Their relationship was never confirmed as romantic, but the portraits tell a story. Her eyes soften when he paints. Her posture relaxes. The brush strokes are tender, almost reverent. And Van Dyck? He painted her more than any other woman at court, again and again, as if trying to capture something that couldn't be said aloud. Charles noticed. He didn't mind. He was too busy arguing with Parliament and accidentally starting a civil war. Henrietta Maria fled to France during the conflict, and Van Dyck died young, his final years marked by illness and quiet sorrow. But the paintings remain. So, was Van Dyck a secret lover? Perhaps not in body, but in spirit, in canvas, in the velvet whispers of oil and affection. Their bond was artistic, emotional, and just scandalous enough to make history tilt its head and wonder. Before Anne Boleyn became Queen of England and lost her head, literally, there was Mary. Mary Boleyn, the elder sister, the original court flirt, and the woman who may have warmed King Henry VIII's bed long before Anne ever caught his eye. Mary was charming, golden-haired, and married off young to a man who was mostly useful for his last name. But her real claim to fame, she was Henry's mistress. For how long, historians debate, but long enough for eyebrows to raise and courtiers to whisper, "She is the king's delight," one noble muttered, probably while adjusting his codpiece and dodging scandal. Anne, meanwhile, watched. She was clever, calculating, and not about to settle for mistress status. She wanted the crown, and she got it after years of flirtation, negotiation, and one very dramatic annulment from Catherine of Aragon. But here is where it gets juicy. Anne may have resented Mary's earlier affair with Henry. Letters suggest tension. Court gossip hinted at icy glances and passive-aggressive embroidery. And when Mary married a commoner without permission, Anne was furious. She banished her from court. Sisterly love? Not exactly. "She has shamed us," Anne declared, while Mary probably rolled her eyes and went back to her chickens. Mary lived out her days quietly, far from the palace drama. Anne, of course, became queen, gave birth to Elizabeth I, and eventually lost her head to a very sharp blade and a very impatient husband. So, was Mary Boleyn a secret lover of a queen's king? Absolutely. And did that spark jealousy, rivalry, and a few awkward family dinners? You bet. Their story is one of ambition, affection, and sibling tension wrapped in velvet and embroidered with scandal. A Tudor temptation that still whispers through history. Mary, Queen of Scots, was drama wrapped in velvet. She had the looks of a goddess, the lineage of royalty, and the luck of a cursed necklace. Her life was a whirlwind of marriages, miscarriages, and political missteps that made Shakespeare look like a minimalist. She married 3 times. The first was sweet. The second was sour. The third? That's where the whispers begin. James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, was bold, brash, and possibly the worst rebound in royal history. He was accused of murdering Mary's second husband, Lord Darnley, a man who was charming, unstable, and occasionally exploded, literally, in a house blast. After Darnley's death, Bothwell swooped in like a hawk in a velvet cape. "He is my protector," Mary declared, while the court collectively gasped and reached for their smelling salts. They married quickly, too quickly. The nobles revolted. The public panicked. And Mary? She wrote letters. Passionate, coded, desperate letters. Historians call them the casket letters. Documents allegedly written by Mary to Bothwell, filled with longing and incriminating affection. "I would give all for you," one letter reads, possibly while Mary was hiding under a tapestry and dodging rebellion. Were they real? Forged? Misinterpreted? The debate rages on, but the whispers remain. Mary's bond with Bothwell was intense, reckless, and possibly romantic. It was also her undoing. She was imprisoned, forced to abdicate, and eventually executed by her cousin Elizabeth of Fairs, who, ironically, had her own velvet whispers to manage. Mary died in 1587, wearing red, the color of martyrdom. Her final words were calm. Her legacy, anything but. So, was Bothwell her secret lover? Absolutely. But he was also her downfall, a velvet whisper that became a scream, a coded romance that history still tries to decipher. Isabella of France was born into royalty and married into misery. As the wife of Edward II, she was expected to smile, wave, and produce heirs. She did all that, and more. But her husband? He was more interested in his male favorites than in ruling or romancing his queen. Enter Piers Gaveston, then Hugh Despenser. Both men were lavished with titles, gifts, and Edward's unwavering affection. Isabella watched as her husband ignored her, insulted her, and handed power to men who treated her like a decorative inconvenience. He has forgotten I am queen, Isabella might have whispered, while sharpening her wit and possibly a dagger. But Isabella didn't sulk. She plotted. She waited. And then she met Roger Mortimer. Mortimer was a nobleman, a rebel, and just dangerous enough to make history lean in. He had escaped the Tower of London, fled to France, and found Isabella, exiled, furious, and ready to set England on fire. Their alliance was political, their chemistry undeniable. He is my sword, Isabella might have said, while Mortimer kissed her hand and handed her a battle plan. Together, they raised an army, invaded England, and overthrew Edward II. The king was imprisoned. His favorites were executed. And Isabella? She ruled as regent for her young son, Edward III, with Mortimer by her side, in power and in bed. The court whispered. The nobles seethed. But Isabella didn't care. She had seized control, claimed her lover, and rewritten the rules until her son grew up. Edward III resented Mortimer's influence. In 1330, he staged a coup, executed Mortimer, and placed Isabella under house arrest. Her reign ended not with a bang, but with a quiet retreat into obscurity. So, was Roger Mortimer her secret lover? Absolutely. But he was also her partner in rebellion, her co-conspirator, and the man who helped her become more than just a queen. He helped her become a legend, a velvet whisper turned battle cry. Before she was the longest reigning monarch in British history, Elizabeth II was a girl who loved horses more than headlines. Her heart belonged to the stables, not the throne. And while the world saw her as a sovereign wrapped in protocol, those closest to her knew she was happiest in a tweed coat, whispering to a mare. She speaks horse better than she speaks politics, one groom once joked, probably while brushing a royal pony. Her passion for horses wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifelong romance. From her first pony, Peggy, to her final days at Windsor, Elizabeth's equestrian devotion was legendary. She bred racehorses, attended every royal ascot, and could name bloodlines, like others, recite poetry. But behind the scenes, there was another whisper. A man, a horseman, a confidant. He wasn't royal. He wasn't political. He was practical, kind, and knew how to handle both stallions and sovereigns. He worked with her horses, walked with her through the paddocks, and shared quiet moments that never made it into palace press releases. He understands her silences, one stable hand said, while watching them laugh over a muddy hoof. Their relationship was never romantic, at least not officially, but it was intimate. emotional, a bond forged in hay and hoofbeats. He was there when she needed calm. He was there when the crown felt heavy. And in the quiet corners of Windsor, where the scent of leather and lavender lingered, he was the one who made her smile. So, was he a secret lover? No, but he was a secret solace, a velvet whisper of companionship that galloped just beneath the surface of royal life. Elizabeth II may have worn the crown, but in her heart, she wore riding boots. Queen Christina of Sweden was never meant to be ordinary. Crowned at the age of 6, she was raised like a prince, taught to ride, fence, debate, and rule with the sharpness of a sword and the mind of a philosopher. She wore breeches instead of bodices, read Descartes before breakfast, and once declared, "I was born with a man's soul." She also refused to marry. The court was scandalized. Suitors came and went, but Christina dismissed them all. She had no interest in being anyone's wife. Her heart, it seemed, was already spoken for. Enter Ebba Sparre. Ebba was a lady-in-waiting, a noblewoman of grace and wit, and Christina's closest companion. The queen called her Belle, her beauty, her darling, her bedfellow. Their letters were filled with longing, poetry, and the kind of intimacy that made courtiers raise their eyebrows and historians raise their pens. "I love you above all things," Christina once wrote. "I would rather live with you than with any prince in the world." They were inseparable. They shared chambers. They shared secrets, and perhaps they shared something deeper, something that dared not speak its name in the 17th century. But Christina's reign was never easy. She shocked her court by abdicating the throne in 1654, citing exhaustion and a desire for freedom. She converted to Catholicism, left Sweden, and wandered Europe in exile. Always flamboyant, always defiant, always alone. She never married. She never forgot. Ebba remained in Sweden, married off to a nobleman. Christina wrote to her for years, her letters growing more wistful, more distant, more haunted. The flame had dimmed, but it never went out. "I have loved you with a love that defies time," she might have whispered, while staring out a Roman window at a sky that no longer held Swedish stars. So, was Ebba Sparre her secret lover? The evidence is circumstantial, poetic, and powerful. In the velvet hush of history, their bond flickers like candlelight, fragile, forbidden, and unforgettable. A forgotten flame, still burning in the shadows of a queen's legacy. Catherine II of Russia, better known as Catherine the Great, wasn't just a monarch. She was a force. She ruled an empire, rewrote laws, expanded borders, and corresponded with Voltaire between military campaigns. But beneath the crown and the conquest was a woman who refused to be lonely. Her marriage to Peter III was a disaster. He was childish, erratic, and more interested in toy soldiers than ruling. Catherine, meanwhile, was brilliant, ambitious, and increasingly impatient. So, she staged a coup, took the throne, and Peter, well, he didn't last long. "I am the state," Catherine might have said, while adjusting her sash and dismissing her husband's funeral. Once in power, Catherine surrounded herself with lovers, handsome, loyal, and often much younger men, who served as companions, confidants, and occasional political pawns. She didn't hide them, she elevated them. She gave them titles, estates, and sometimes entire palaces. Grigory Orlov helped her seize the throne. Stanisław Poniatowski became King of Poland. Grigory Potemkin may have been her secret husband. His letters to her were filled with longing, strategy, and the kind of emotional depth that made courtiers blush. My soul is yours, Potemkin wrote, even when my body is not. Catherine's lovers were carefully chosen. She valued intelligence, charm, and discretion. They were never just playthings. They were part of her court, her strategy, her life. And though the gossip swirled, Catherine never apologized. A woman must make her own happiness, she might have said, while sipping champagne and signing a treaty. She ruled for over 3 decades, and through it all, she never slept alone. Not because she feared solitude, but because she understood power, pleasure, and the comfort of warm company in a cold palace. So, was Catherine the Great scandalous? Certainly. But she was also sovereign. Her lovers were velvet whispers in a rain that thundered across history. Every queen leaves behind a legacy. Some leave empires, some leave scandals, but the most unforgettable leave whispers, soft, secret echoes of the hearts they held close. This final whisper belongs to all of them, to the queens who ruled with iron and slept with longing, to the consorts who smiled through betrayal and found comfort in quiet arms, to the sovereigns who never married but never stopped loving, to the women who wore crowns by day and dreams by night. There was Eleanor of Aquitaine, who defied kings and may have found solace in troubadours. There was Anne of Austria, whose letters to her confessor read more like love poems than prayers. There was Princess Louise, daughter of Queen Victoria, whose sculptor may have shaped more than marble. And there was Elizabeth II, who found her truest peace not in palaces, but in paddocks beside horses and the men who understood her silences. These whispers aren't always written in history books. They're tucked into diaries, folded into letters, hidden in portraits and footnotes. But they're there, velvet soft, candle-lit, and eternal. Because even queens need love. Even queens need comfort. Even queens whisper in the dark. And now, dear dreamer, the velvet curtain falls. You've wandered through centuries of secrets, tiptoed past tapestries of longing, and curled up beside queens who loved boldly, quietly, and sometimes dangerously. Let the whispers lull you. Let the stories cradle you. Let the crown slip from your thoughts and the candle dim. The queens are resting now, and so should you. Good night.